Hey, what's good? It's Woog. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you were into the fight talk. So it looks like Errol Spence Jr. versus Yordenis Ugas is official for April 16th. This is at AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas, which is right next to Errol Spence's hometown. So this is going to be for 3 of the 4 titles at welterweight. Errol Spence holds a WBC and IBF titles. The IBF he earned by beating Kell Brook. That's just after Kell Brook got stopped by Gennady Golovkin, 2 divisions up at 160 middleweight. So Errol Spence won the IBF belt from Kell Brook, and then a few fights later, he won the WBC belt in a unification match against Shawn Porter. So this Spence versus Ugas fight is going to be for those 2 belts from Errol Spence, and then Yordenis Ugas is the current WBA super welterweight title holder. Not super welterweight as in like 154. I mean super belt as opposed to the regular belt. The WBC and WBA, they do this funny style stuff with different tiers of championship belts. So this is the main WBA belt that Ugas won 2 fights ago in September of 2020 in a vacant title bout against Abel Ramos. This is the belt that was stripped from Manny Pacquiao after Manny Pacquiao took it from Keith Thurman. So this was up for grabs because they stripped Manny due to inactivity. Ugas wins that belt against Abel Ramos, and then he actually defends it in his next fight against former champ, the legendary Manny Pacquiao, several-time champ in several divisions, one of the greatest of all time, Manny Pacquiao. So Ugas is one of these guys on that very short list of guys who've beaten Manny Pacquiao, and that's in Ugas' very last fight. And that fight actually took place because one of the most unfortunate things of 2021 happened in Errol Spence versus Manny Pacquiao, or should I say Manny Pacquiao versus Errol Spence, getting canceled due to Errol Spence Jr. being diagnosed with a torn retina in his eye and having surgery on that. That was pretty heartbreaking for boxing fans. And that might be the fight that I was looking forward to the most in the entire year. And there were a lot of good fights in 2021. Errol Spence Jr. versus Manny Pacquiao, or Pacquiao versus Errol Spence Jr. was at the top of that list, and they canceled that fight. It was a huge opportunity, I mean, for both guys, but, it was that stamp opportunity for Errol Spence Jr. to go against a legend. Yes, Errol Spence already, beaten Shawn Porter, Danny Garcia, Mikey Garcia, Lamont Peterson, Kell Brook, Algieri, and so forth, but this was supposed to be the opportunity of a lifetime, and this would have undoubtedly boosted his visibility to mainstream America if he performed well. I mean, well, either way, he's fighting Manny Pacquiao, but Ugas was the late replacement. So going into the fight, Ugas was an underdog, but he wasn't a major underdog. This was a situation where it's like, well, damn, Manny Pacquiao is 42 years old. He's, about 2 years inactive since beating Keith Thurman. He has been training for a southpaw in Errol Spence Jr. just to flip it at the last minute, and then you've got to fight this very technically sound, orthodox, very different style boxer, counterpuncher, Yordenis Ugas. I mean, damn. And, and props to Manny Pacquiao for even taking that fight. That was pretty G'd up that he was like, all right. But that's kind of like the story of Manny Pacquiao's career. If you look at his, fight by fight, dare to be great schedule, this was just another page, and maybe the most fitting final page of Manny Pacquiao's career, even though he ended up losing via decision. So Ugas, even with that win over Pacquiao, it still kind of feels like there's a sense of, well, how good is Ugas really? Like, yes, he did fight like a super even fight with Shawn Porter. Watching that fight, I thought he beat Shawn Porter. And I'm a Shawn Porter fan, and I'm like, ooh, Shawn Porter's really got his hands full with Ugas. That decision could have gone either way. They granted Shawn Porter the split decision win over Ugas, but after that, Ugas beat Omar Figueroa Jr., giving him his first loss. That I know Figueroa had been injured a lot, inactive a lot, but Ugas did give Omar Figueroa his first loss. Then he fights Mike Dallas Jr. Then he wins that vacant title bout against Abel Ramos. And then he fought the, near super fight. You can't really call it a super fight, even though it was a Manny Pacquiao fight. But then he has that fight with Pacquiao. But let's just take a moment and be glad that, look, No, we didn't get Errol Spence Jr. versus Terence Crawford. Of course, that's what everybody wants to see in the welterweight division. It's almost frustrating to the point where it almost feels like it already might be past its not its expiration date, as in I don't want to see the fight to happen anymore. But in terms of knowing that you got both guys in their prime. Look, Terence Crawford is what, like 34 years old now? Yes, he did just become the first person to stop Sean Porter, but I mean, when people hit a sudden cliff, even if it's a slight drop off, it could happen so suddenly, and all of a sudden you're not dealing with the same fighter. I don't want that to happen with Errol Spence Jr. versus Terence Crawford. They're too damn good for that one to like slip away and then to have some late stage career type of fight. I mean, Deontay Wilder versus Anthony Joshua when they were both undefeated and just tearing through, look, none of them, it turns out, look, Tyson Fury, beat Vladimir Klitschko, but what the people wanted to see for some time, for a couple years, was these two knockout kings, Wilder and Anthony Joshua, who were knocking out all of their opponents at the time. They wanted to see them lock horns. That didn't happen. And now, even if it does happen, it's well after the point of maximum relevance. It's unfortunate. I don't want to see that happen with Spence versus Terence Crawford, but we're really getting close. We're getting close. So Errol Spence versus Yordenis Ugas. Again, people are still thinking, how good is Ugas really? It's like we don't want to give him credit, even though we've seen him perform well. Yes, he does have a few losses on his record. Most of them came at least like 2014 or before. But, I mean, he's looking pretty elite. But there's no one particular ability that he has that just jumps off the screen at you. He's not just knocking people out cold with one punch. He doesn't show, Manny Pacquiao type hand speed or Shane Mosley type right hand, left hand hook type of hand speed. There's nothing really like scintillating in his game, yet he's about as effective as anybody. The question is, can he deal with like a big top welterweight in his absolute prime in Errol Spence? And even that is assuming that we're dealing with Errol Spence in his prime still. And look, a lot of people are going to be like, don't overthink this. Spence beats Ugas. And yes, if you had to just put the money down today and say, what is the most likely outcome? You've got to go Errol Spence, but more specifically, Errol Spence via decision, right? That's like the most likely outcome. Anything that tips the scale in the other direction, look, I don't think Errol Spence, coming back from the retina tear and a dominant performance with Danny Garcia. Granted, he beat Danny Garcia in his last fight more convincingly than anybody I've seen beat Garcia. Sean Porter and Keith Thurman wins over Garcia were more like 115 to 113 type, maybe 116 to 112, but 115 to 113-ish. The Errol Spence victory over Garcia was more 117, 111 type of win. But it's such a delicate balance when you're getting somebody who is at peak level. Their preparation is very routine. Everything is like a well-oiled machine. That's why they're able to operate at the highest level. I feel like even the slightest twist or disruption to that mechanism is able to make somebody just all of a sudden look like they're not themselves. I don't think it takes much. And yes, getting launched from your drop top vehicle at a high speed, yes, he survived with his life. Yes, he apparently made it out of here without any broken bones. Look, I'm just not, I hope it didn't have any sort of long-lasting damage, but I can't say conclusively that that's the case. I don't know what kind of tissue damage, what kind of, impact, some sort of longer lasting where it doesn't even rear its head until later on type of impact this might have had. And again, a lot of people are going to be like, don't overthink this. Spence beats Ugas via decision. Or don't overthink this. He seems fine. Look at how he performed against Danny Garcia. And I get it. He did look excellent and very comfortable and dominant. Like he's basically controlling fights with his jab now. Like this isn't the body snatcher we were seeing earlier in his career where he just had people pinned up against, the ropes. He had Lamont Peterson just walking him down, beating the hell out of him. Like, this was more like the one that we saw fight Mikey Garcia, where he's somehow gone from somebody who was almost like a George Foreman kind of patient hunter, even though George Foreman in his younger days wasn't so patient. I'm saying Errol Spence was a patient hunter, kind of getting you into the vulnerable positions where you're closer to the perimeter. You've got less room to move. He traps you, boom, boom, hits you. And then that type of pattern wears on you until you just can't take it anymore. Like the way that he beat Kell Brook when he earned his IBF title, his first championship. Errol Spence kind of went from that almost to somebody who's turned his jab into one of the most effective tools in boxing. I think Errol Spence's jab is one of the best punches in boxing, and he's a southpaw. So his right jab is controlling a lot of his most recent fights. Look, we could get into a more analytical breakdown, and we will get into a couple videos as we get closer to the fight date. I just wanted to say I'm very happy that they made this fight, and I'm saying, like, not so fast with Errol Spence via decision here. I mean, again, it's the most likely outcome, you would have to say. Anything other than that would be unexpected. And look, it's really a guess as to whether Errol Spence has, unconsciously hit a cliff, or if it's going to be revealed to us, the public, that, yeah, it turns out he's not quite as sharp, as reflexive. I mean, not that he was like that type of snappy reflex. He has good reflexes. He doesn't have that Pernell Whitaker, Floyd Mayweather gene to where you just have that cat-like quickness in your upper body. But he moves, and he moves effectively. He's not happy-footed. He's wide stance, but a very technical fighter, but so is Ugas. This is going to be very interesting, and I can't wait to kind of rewatch, a lot of the essential, films to really break this one down. But, aside from either Terence Crawford or, of course, one of the most exciting prospects, either Jerome Boots Ennis or Virgil Ortiz Jr., who I'm sure anybody at this point would be happy to see fight Errol Spence, Terence Crawford, Ugas. We want to see more Boots Ennis and Virgil Ortiz Jr., but I am satisfied, at least. I'm not thrilled like I would be with Spence versus Crawford, but I'm really looking forward to Errol Spence Jr. versus Yordenis Ugas. We're about to see how great Yordenis Ugas is in this one. This is an opportunity of a lifetime, and it's going to be interesting to see how Ugas, stays firm in his commitment after a Manny Pacquiao fight, especially given the win. We never know if somebody's going to suddenly lose hunger, even without knowing it. But again, this is just conjecture at this point. These are just possibilities. But yeah, let me know what you think upon first glance with Errol Spence Jr. versus Yordenis Ugas. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you were into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.